Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And it is 6:15 a.m. Eastern Time here in Florida on the East Coast. So my name is Angeline Constantino, and I am here to share my story of how I broke free from my past and reclaimed my power after domestic violence. So, thank you so much, Angie, for inviting me to speak at your summit. I feel super blessed and humbled and super blessed. So, never mind how I look this morning, but authenticity is me. So, anyways, I hope you're all having your cup of coffee. So, what I'm going to do is let's just dive right into my story because my story is one of claiming victory and stepping into my power. So, we're going to get started right now. So, if you're watching the live, just hashtag live in the comments. And if you're watching the replay, please hashtag replay. And how many of you are ready to hear my story? So I just, like I said, I feel super blessed and humbled. It's very early this morning, but you know what? The time is now. The time is now to reclaim your power. So, here we go. Once upon a time, I thought that I was married to the love of my life. And at this time, um, I moved to New York in 1988 from Minnesota. And I left New York because I was seeking a better life for myself, and I was in my 20s at the time. So during that time, I went to college to pursue my associate's degree in marketing. And during that time, I met a man who was 19 years older than me, and I had joined a youth, like a young adult league group out of the church that I used to go to on Long Island. So, make a long story short, we met, we went out, and we started to develop a close friendship. And the next thing you know, there was chemistry, okay, if that makes sense. There was a lot of chemistry. So I was living with my uncle and my aunt, and I was working in the diner. I was going to college, and I was doing all these things. And then the next thing you know, I packed my bags and I drove to New Rochelle, New York, to live with him on his 38 Carver Mariner yacht. So what he decided to do was to, and I was young at that time. I was in my 20s, and you know how it is, like when, I don't know, um, you know, um, how you feel, but being in your 20s, you want to explore life, you want to expand your horizons. So we lived together. I started working in his advertising direct mail business, and we were in the process of moving from New York City to upstate New York. At that time, it was the Hudson Valley in Rhinebeck, New York. So I worked at his business, and I was the one who brought in the money. So I brought in sales for his company, which was direct mail advertising and marketing. So I was, on the road. I was working in New York City, and it was like the glamorous life, if that makes sense. People thought that we were living the glamorous life, and we would go out to lunch or go out to dinner, whining and dining, and that was what it was then. Okay, so when we bought the house in 1989, we decided to get married at the Justice of the Peace. So there was no wedding, just the judge and his wife. And I remember when the judge was reading everything, he said, for better, for worse, you know how that is? When you get married, for better, for worse, till death do us part. That really struck a chord with me. And I will tell you why. I will share why in a minute. Because back then, things, like when you got married, it was for better, for worse, for richer, or poor, till death do us part. And that stayed with me for a while because I know, like, I came from a Greek family, he came from a Greek family, and there was no such thing as a divorce. There was no such thing. So we got married at the Justice of the Peace. We had there was a reception at a beautiful restaurant near the Huts, right on the Hudson River. So it was like, wow, I'm living this life now. I'm living this life. But then soon things started to change. So what changed? He essentially took off his mask. He became controlling, he became manipulative, and he was accusing me of things that I did not do. I did not do those things, okay? Such as stealing money, or, like while I was bringing money, um, checks were bouncing, and it was not my doing because I kept a careful record of everything. So it turned out, and this happened, which I found out much later, unfortunately, in 2008, the stock market had crashed, and he was writing balance transfer checks against my credit because the card was in both names, our accounts were in both names. So he wrote balance transfer checks to buy mutual funds. So essentially, I found myself $50,000 in debt, and that was not good. That was not good. And what happened was, before that, I was still working in this business, and then one night in December of 1999, an argument ensued in the bedroom, and I was lying down. I had my robe, and I was crying. I mean, I was literally crying. And I remember getting up, and I remember saying that I am just going to go into the other room. I am just going to go into the other room and try to get a good night's sleep. I didn't make it into the other room, which was the guest room. I He took me by the neck. He grabbed me by the neck from behind. He threw me against the wall, which was near the bathroom, and I fell backwards. And my nose cracked. So I found myself bleeding. I was bleeding, and I was in pain. I was in so much pain that I was crying. I mean, it got worse. I mean, literally, it got worse. So a few minutes later, I got up, went into the bathroom to try to clean myself off, and then the next thing you know, he said, let's go to the hospital. So this is not unusual. So he took me to the emergency room, and I was in ER the entire night until this happened late at night, which, when the abuse starts to happen, like around 10 p.m., I was in the hospital at midnight, and I was there until 5 o'clock in the morning. I was on IV, and the hospital called the he was a surgeon specializing in nose surgery. So he came out and told me, you're going to need reconstructive nose surgery, and you cannot wait to do this. You got to do this now. So 48 hours later, I was in another hospital, and I received prayer, and that's when, and at that time, I felt ashamed to tell the police what happened. I actually told the police that I fell down the stairs, which was not true, and I don't think that they believed me, but they just went along with it. So I had reconstructive nose surgery, and I was still in pain. In fact, the hospital, the nurse accidentally gave me too much Demerol, which caused me to feel sick, and I had to stay overnight. So I stayed overnight, and I'm grateful, that I had health insurance at the time because I was working. So I was out of work for 3 weeks, and then finally got back to work, and I started to make a name for myself. I was working for other, companies and corporations, so I could reclaim my identity. And this is when I started to feel stronger, you know, for me, because I was out there working and making a name for myself. Because I felt during my marriage, I lost my identity. And I struggled with that for a long time. I also struggled with, and I also felt ashamed, shamed and guilt. And I feel, so grateful that fast forward to 2010, I woke up with an epiphany. And the epiphany was that I was going to file for divorce because I realized that I could not stay in this toxic marriage anymore. And like I said, there was financial abuse, there was verbal abuse, there was physical abuse. I mean, we would go on trips and he would be literally yelling at me. And I said, I don't deserve to live this way. And then I found out during that time the smear campaign started. So what do I mean by that? He wrote letters to the New York State Police admonishing me, basically just putting me down, accusing me of things that I never did with the business, commingling funds, the whole bit, and said that I was crazy and that I needed to go to a psychiatric ward and all this other stuff. So, and also he wrote letters to my therapist. He wrote letters to the mental hygiene department. Meanwhile, he had gone for therapy and they diagnosed him with bipolar disorder. So, and depression and anxiety. So that just made it worse. That just made it worse. And then on top of that, while I was out having coffee, my first cousin called me and she said, I need to talk to you because your mom is crying. I said, why is my mom crying? I said, that is unacceptable. Um, so my first cousin told me that my, when I was married at the time, he had called my parents to, and basically put me down. And he told them that I was crazy and everything. So my mom was literally crying and I just felt so bad. I was like, I said, why didn't I tell my parents about this horrible marriage? So my dad offered to help me with the divorce proceedings. So that was the time when I had the epiphany and the awakening. So the pivoting moment in my life was when I woke up, and I didn't tell him what I was going to do, obviously. I made a plan. I contacted the authorities and the New York State Police, the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office, where I lived in Rhinebeck at the time, and I told them that I was going to drive to Poughkeepsie to file divorce proceedings. And we were together for a long time, meaning we were together for, married totally, it was 22 years. So, got in the car and I drove to Poughkeepsie and I wrote out a check for $5,000. And that was literally my savings because he commingled funds. He withdrew money from our bank account because I didn't know any better to start my own bank account, which I did later on. So I wrote out the check and I said to myself, what good is the money if you're miserable? Not only that, I felt like my self-esteem was down, my self-confidence was down, and I felt the whole world was crashing. But actually, God was deconstructing me. And during this time, so when I filed for the divorce, I was researching a place to stay to escape over the weekend. So I drove to Saratoga Springs, New York, which at that time was 2 hours from Rhinebeck, and I stayed. I stayed with a friend for the weekend, and I started to explore the area. And I said, you know what? I'm going to make a plan to move here. And that's when I started to get my self confidence back. And I remember during this time, I had to learn to love myself, because when you love on yourself, you're able to love others. So I had to learn how to go out on a date all by myself. And I know, and I don't know about you, but I struggled with this for a long time. And, you know, and, for me, I was like, oh my God, I'm going out on a date by myself. So I was out at a restaurant by myself, and a good friend of mine who was a major called me, and we were talking. She was checking up on me, and she said, you know what? She said, dining alone can be very tranquil. And she was so right. She was so right. I was like, oh my goodness, look what I just did. So I learned to love myself. And what I did was I invested in myself, in personal development. I took courses, and I had a coach who was mentoring me and guiding me through this whole divorce process. Because let me tell you something, escaping domestic violence is not easy. And what happens is, for a lot of women who I know, they are scared to leave their spouse or partner. And I know this feeling all too well, especially if there are children. They are so afraid to leave because of financial reasons, because of shame, or they feel that they are going to get killed. And what I had to do was I had to make a plan, but not tell him what the plan was. So my goals were obviously to get the divorce proceedings going, and I was able to gather all the documentation. I put them in a safe place at my local bank at the time. So I went to a coffee shop, and I had documents like this big, and I spent the whole day there working on what she requested, so we could start to document my case. So I documented. I started to journal, and I started to pray and meditate, incorporate meditation and breathing techniques. And journaling was huge for me, because during the time before I filed for divorce, I was journaling my feelings, and that was actually evidence in my case against my ex. So I journaled, meditation, prayer. I turned to the Lord, and I realized that I was not alone in this journey, in this transition. I was not alone. So I took steps, major steps, a huge leap of faith. And when I lost my job in corporate America because of him, I was fired. I started to explore the online space, and there were a lot of things that were holding me back, because for so many years I lived in the pit. I lived in the darkness, and I lived in that box or that tub, that muck. And I reached my breaking point. So when I reached my breaking point, that's when I said, I am going to power through this divorce. I am going to step into my truth. And God was deconstructing me into the person that I am today. So we had no children. We went to court several times. The process was frustrating, because in New York State, I was actually not allowed to leave, meaning I was not allowed to actually get an apartment for myself. So, because we were married for over 10 years, they considered that abandonment. So I had a limited order of protection. So I moved all my stuff upstairs. I, um, I took steps, and I was basically living like a gypsy for 1 year, meaning staying in people's houses, staying in a motel room. And during that time, I was exploring the online space, and I got myself involved with a company that literally changed my life. And I was working behind the scenes. So, and I said to myself, the crying is going to stop. The grief is going to stop right now, because I was grieving my marriage, which is totally understandable, um, which is totally normal. You're grieving your marriage because you're still emotionally attached to him, and then you start reminiscing about the good times that you had, um, in the marriage. And in the case, that was me, reminiscing. And I remember sitting at a coffee shop one time in December. I'm sorry, the same coffee shop that I went to, um, and a lady came up to me, and we sat down and we talked, and I was like crying. I was grieving. I was grieving my marriage. And my attorney, who was really, she was great. She said, you know what? You just got to get out of it. You just have to snap out of it. And because your relationship right now is a very toxic relationship, and it was very, very toxic. He wasn't the same person that I married. Um, and he refused to go for help. He started a smear campaign against me, which backfired, because I had the cooperation of the New York State Police and Sheriff's Office, and also my therapist. And I had an advocate. Not hired, but I worked with a domestic violence advocate for 1 year. Um, so I could to help me process everything, and to help me transition and move and escape. So that's exactly what I did. And there were still, and I mean, he basically beat me down to the ground emotionally. I mean, verbal abuse to me is worse than physical abuse, but he literally beat me down to the ground. But I took steps. I said, I am going to surrender right now, and I am going to start the process of leaving, making a plan to move. So I had 3 goals in mind. Number one, to work on myself, to build my self-confidence. And during that time, I had a lot more clarity, and I knew what I wanted to do. And number two was to um, move to Saratoga Springs and to reach a settlement agreement. And this whole divorce proceeding went on for 1 year. Um, so finally, I had moved to Saratoga Springs 2 weeks before the divorce became final. And when I drove to Poughkeepsie, which was 2 hours to sign the papers, I felt liberated. I felt like £1,000,000 was lifted off my shoulders. And I mean, it was like victory. I was like, literally, I felt like dancing in the streets. And I actually, when I was on social media, on Facebook, I actually posted that the divorce is final, I'm free, so much support, so much love. And this is all because I worked on myself and I stepped into my truth. So I, did a lot of research. I went to the public library. I had no computer, I had no laptop, nothing. But I had to figure out a way to make a plan and escape and step into my truth, and break free. So when I moved to Saratoga Springs, there was no looking back. That was the huge breakthrough, because because I literally went through a breakdown during my divorce proceedings. And the breakdown led to the breakthrough, because God was deconstructing me into the person that I am today. God molded me. he deconstructed me. So, and I was still struggling. I had to do a lot of shadow work. I had to remove some self limiting beliefs that were holding me back from reaching my greatest potential. So, I invested in coaches and mentors, and that literally changed my life. And then um, when when COVID happened in 2020, I realized that I had to do something because I was laid off from corporate America. And let me just go back a little bit. In 2018, I had hired a mentor because I did not want to work in corporate America anymore, and I wanted to start a business, something that I'm really, really passionate about. So, lo and behold, he said to me, "You know what, Angeline? You have so much potential, but you know what you haven't done yet? You haven't shared your story with the world on social media of how you overcame domestic violence." Because I was still going through, a lot of issues. I had to do some inner work, so I hired him so I could do inner work, which I did, and it literally changed my life. So I went live on Facebook in March of 2018, holding the phone. I was in my one bedroom apartment, and I shared my story with the world. And it wasn't perfect, but guess what? 7 million views later. When I woke up the next day and saw that my story and my live went viral, I was like, oh my goodness. That means 7 million people were impacted. And I felt so grateful. I was and crying, meeting tears of joy, you know, because when you go through shadow work and inner work and journaling and meditation and sharing your story, I mean, I was literally crying. In fact, in the beginning of the video, I was crying. And then I composed myself, got myself together, and shared my story. And like I said, it wasn't perfect. The lighting was bad, but it wasn't perfect. But guess what? I did it messy. And divorce is messy. Navigating through that whole process is messy. And I had to, I prayed, meditated, I journaled every single day. I journal to this day things that I am grateful for. I started to immerse myself into gratitude. And that was a huge mindset shift for me. And what I encourage all of you to do here, for those of you who are going to be watching the replay here, I encourage you to write at least 3 things that you are grateful for in the beginning. Journaling, listening to personal development. I listened to Jim Rohn. I listened to, I've invested in myself. Listen to something inspirational. Meditate. Find a quiet place and just meditate. And you will realize that that's going to change your life. You're just going to be in that state of gratitude. And I did a lot of praying. And like I said, when when I pray and meditate every single day, there's tears in my eyes, but guess what? That's the healing process. And I had to work on myself to heal. And the healing journey is amazing. You will rediscover what you are truly capable of. Take a walk in the park, go to a hair salon, get your makeup done, do things, I did a lot of nature walking, and here now where I live in Florida, I go out for a walk and I get grounded in nature. So immerse yourself. Work on, because you can do this during your transition. You can do this. And I know that when I would go out by myself, I said, you know what, I can live on my own. I can do this. And it's been an amazing journey. I'm still, to this day, just tapping into resources. So ask yourself this: what is holding you back from reaching your greatest potential? What is holding you back? Why are you still feeling stuck? Time to take a self assessment. And um, because it's easy to blame other situations, but guess what? You know what you have to do? Step into, you have to just take that leap of faith and get over the fear, meaning push the fear out the window. Just push it out the window. Push it out the window. So if you're feeling stuck and overwhelmed, lost, depressed, please reach out to me, send me a message, and I would love to have a conversation with you, get to know you, and I want to share something with you. So this came from one of my students. So she sent me a Christmas card. Look at this. I mean, isn't this beautiful? And I received it yesterday. And I hold a space for domestic violence survivors. And she wrote me this beautiful note, which I'm going to read right now. She goes, and I'm going to withhold her name for privacy reasons. So she says, I am a domestic violence survivor advocate, and my goal is to support women of domestic violence, to let them know that they are not alone, to help them understand that this is not their fault. Because guess what? It is not your fault that you're in this mess, okay? And they didn't ask to be abused. We did not ask to be abused, okay? We did not ask to be abused, and it is not your fault. So, and she also wrote a huge thank you note that she says, Dear Angeline, I want to thank you for all you do for us survivors. You are an inspiration to all of us, and we are so thankful to have you. You know how that made me feel? That made me, I was so excited. Like, it made me feel humbled because I know what she went through, and I know what other women have gone through. And just know that you are not alone in this journey. You are not alone. So I hope and pray that this live helped you. I mean, this is a great time to have a summit going into the new year. I have, start working on your goals, because I have stepped into the new me, the 2.0 version of me. And I know what I'm capable of. And I want to see you thrive and live your happiest life ever, because that's so important, especially in today's world. It is so important. And during my journey, I became more self-aware, and I didn't feel ashamed anymore. I have shared my story with podcasters, and actually, for me, I found my passion. So during my mentorship, I found my true passion was to start a movement and to start a podcast to break the silence, because guess what? We have a voice, and our voices must be heard. Our stories must be shared with the world, because your story is going to have an impact on people's lives. You don't know who's watching. You people are watching us, but you don't know. And don't be ashamed. Don't feel ashamed to share your story. And that's where the breakthroughs happen. That's where abundance happens. That's prosperity and abundance starts to flow, and you start to attract the right people in your life. So I hope that this live was helpful. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. Send me a direct message. I would love to, have a virtual coffee chat with you ladies. You ladies are very special to me, and I want to help you. I want to serve you. And I want to read something else. So this is a friend who escaped domestic violence, and she sent me this mug. This is a friendly reminder. You ready? You are awesome. So ladies, you are awesome. This is your friendly reminder that you are awesome. So I am going to end the live right now. And thank you so much for listening to my story. And feel free to send me a message and let's have a virtual coffee chat. I would love to meet you. All right? So claim victory. You are victorious. Claim victory. And trust me, you will live your happiest life ever. So, on that note, cheers. Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much.